So let's look at the list of methods that were added to from GeneXus 15. They are separated in two groups because the last ones apply to nested levels. You see insert, update, etc., get by key, remove by key, and these are for nested levels. So let's look at these methods one by one and see methods for their use and suggestions. The insert method is to be applied in a variable based on a business component that can be scale or collection, as you saw already. And then you get a message saying whether the insertion operation of this business component that was uploaded was successful or not, or the collection of business components. Then we can look at the second syntaxis where we are saving the step of assigning something. We are just asking whether it was successful or not, and we act accordingly. You may wonder, we had the save, right? That made both operations, insert and update. Why have we added this? Have you added this? Well, the first one works with the mode that the variable business components has. First, we had to see whether there had been a load or not, to see whether an update was necessary, and then the insert. And maybe the mode was in update for some reason, and I wanted to make an insert. So in this manner, my intention becomes clearer to do exactly what the name of the method indicates, and then some examples that we are going to see later that simplifies the resolution. So this is the first usage example. Here I have the transaction show that has two levels. Each show has an identifier that has an auto number, a name, the date in which it will take place, a type, as I said, a concert, for example, circus, theater play, the place where it will take place, an image, and here are sectors that are being numbered. So I have attributes, and we will put, for example, the stalls, the tribunes, the price, the currency, and then we have the total quantity of seats available and some other attributes to know how many seats were sold and how many are available. This transaction has the business component true. So let's say that with a code I will have to insert show. For the time being, I only have the first level information. The sectors had not been defined yet. They will be entered interactively later. So here we can visualize the code that we used to employ, and if there's more than one show, you have to ask for memory. But here, I'm not assigning anything to the identifier because it's auto number, then the name of the show, Romeo and Juliet, the kind of show. Here I do a find in order to search whether it's a ballet, and then I find the ID, then the identifier, an image for the show that I'm going to upload, an image that was first imported in the knowledge base. So this is what we were used to doing, loading the attributes or properties of the business component and then apply the insert. I ask whether it was successful, I do commit, send the message, or otherwise I extract the messages and show them. This is valid. Now, if I already had the information about the show and the sectors, I wouldn't do it by hand as we used to do, uploading all these data and then asking for memory for the lines and asking for values for this line. In this case, the recommendation is to define a data provider. So let's look at the solution. In this case, what I would do is to create a data provider, which is called dpShow. What I do is to drag down the show transaction here from the Explorer KB. And then I complete that data provider and see how legible it is. Very easy to read. Here I complete the data of the show, the date. I'm looking for the type of show, the place, and then the sectors. And I copied this underneath and added one more sector. This data provider is legible. I don't have to ask for memory or do anything with the lines. And then I have to invoke it. Here, instead of writing the whole gigantic code, what I'm doing is asking the data supplier, the data provider, to upload the information in the variable, which is the business component of the show. And when it has been uploaded, I do insert, and then I ask whether it succeeded. I do commit and send the messages. Since I have dragged the show transaction, the output property of the data provider has been completed, and what I will get from it is similar to what I have dragged. Since I dragged a business component show, it's going to return a business component show, which is uploaded with what I indicated. The variable used to exist for a long since the past, but the saving has changed. Yes, that has been the trend for a long time. But firstly, there may be many people who are not using the business component. Maybe many people don't use it. So the recommendation is, well, find what's easier to use. Yes, that's what we want to do nowadays. That's what we would like you to start using. Now, let's upload a collection of shows. We want to insert several shows and its sectors. And it's more or less the same thing. What I did was to create the data provider, which is now called DP shows, and I have dragged the show transaction here, included the data of the first show with 2 sectors, then the other one with 1 sector, and the difference with regard to the other data provider is that here I turned on the collection property to true, because when I dragged the transaction, it understood that it had to scale 1 show, and here it's going to return n. And when I made when I invoke to the data provider, I have this new variable, which is a business component in the variable collection. I have the whole collection of shows that I uploaded, and this is very easy to read, easy to manage, and then I apply the insert, and if everything went well, commit, or otherwise I process the errors. Here I have a subroutine, because since there are n shows, I have to do the iteration of each one of the shows in this collection in order to see what happened if it was not successful, because maybe some are inserted and others not, and it's necessary to extract the messages from each one. Another example of the use of this facility here, I determine a procedure called insert show. So the variable is business this is the variable, the business component, and I just insert. But since I have called from several places, then it's easier. And in the past, maybe the mode was wrong and it didn't do what I wanted. So if it's okay, I do commit. Otherwise, I extract the errors. Now, the update method, the syntax is analogous. The variable is based on the business component. I apply the update method, or I ask what you see here, and let's look at an example. Using the same transaction, if I wanted to update 1 show, then I could do as I did before, load, update the date, then update, commit, or correct the errors. But in this version, we have an alternative that has a better performance. It's not necessary to do load. You can do this to the variable business component. We ask the memory, and we assign to the key the value we want to update. Thus, I am avoiding having access to the database because the load is doing it. Therefore, we can now do this. I'm going to give you all these slides in a PDF. I imagine that it's also important to use a new methodology, because in some programs we have been that people make a lot of codes, delete it's this and that, and the code becomes extremely complicated to use and update. So when you receive something like this, you have to have diagrams of status to find out what's going on. And sometimes this leads to errors. And all this is going to impact the user, because it's necessary to validate each one of the things whenever you make a change, and it becomes quite crazy. Thank you for this contribution. Yes, in fact, in the next example, you will see this very clearly. It's just as you said, we are improving the language in order to make everything more explicit. The syntaxes help GeneXus and help ourselves. Let's look at another example, another application that is going to be used in the registry and shows. It may happen that a place has to be that has to undergo construction work, and the place is going to be closed, so the shows have to be moved elsewhere. Here I have panels to put the place that will be closed, the dates range, and the shows that have to be moved elsewhere. So I'm going to define the events with this button. Here I did for each, I'm mentioning the base transaction. I'm going to the shows that fulfill these requirements. They were supposed to take place in this place during these dates. And here I'm updating with update, as I showed before. So I'm just changing the place, updating, commit, and if there are errors, I send the message. So this is a loop that is making the update. If there are not too many registries, if you don't see a performance problem here, we recommend it to you so that the rules are executed. Now let's look at another alternative for the same case. I have the same web panel, and the proposal is for this button to use the syntaxes I told you about. Here I have the data provider. I am loading the collection of shows already modified. So I define a data provider, and I'm sending the parameters I have here. So this data provider, we're going to see right away, is having access to the shows that fulfill the conditions we determined and changing the venue. And it returns a collection of shows that have already been changed. So I just have to update the collection of shows. Let's look at the data provider. I had to create it, drag shows, indicate that I'm surfing in with the shows that fulfill these requirements. That's what the for each did. And now I have a collection, and I apply the update and then commit all the messages. Between these two alternatives, you can choose one or the other according to your preferences, because the performance is the same one. Some may say they like the previous one because here in the code you see where I am, what I'm doing, and I don't need to create another object, for example. But in another case, maybe you want to encapsulate things and have a very clear name of the data provider, and then return it and apply the update. So it's a massive update. The performance is the same, because here we have an SQL and here we have to update, but it's the same thing because the data provider is serving as a for each, and the update may seem easier, but you have to do one by one. So the performance is the same. And here, with regard to the insert, let's say that you receive a show and you want to update it. In the past, it was complicated to do it with Saver because I receive a show and I had to do load, and I was unable to do it in that same variable. I had to do it in a variable one, show the ID, etc. So here it's much easier to receive it and to apply the update. Now let's look at the insert or update in the same line of syntax, and we'll look at another example. Here I have a two-level country transaction and the cities. In the database and the physical charts, we have the country, Uruguay, with 3,300,000 inhabitants, and in country city, we have three cities, Montevideo, Maldonado, and Colonia. So I want to update the population and add two more cities. Since it's an update, well, maybe I could have just inserted, but now I'm going to use insert and update. So I created a data provider, I drag the transaction from the Explorer, I assign one to country ID and this population, and I put the cities. When I call the data provider, this data provider is returning here in country what you see. Remember, I had dragged countries just one, so at the bottom I didn't add anything. I just kept that it is one country, and the business component country returns this already uploaded, and since I apply insert or update, it tries to insert, but it already existed, so it updates and changes the population. And then it tries to insert this and finds out that it can be inserted. So it's the same country with two more cities and a change in the population. And we can do it with insert or update, like the previous example. Now, let's look at the other methods that are to be applied to aligned levels. Get by key used to be more costly. It allows to get a record that corresponds to a line specifying its key. But first, the structure has to be loaded in the memory using the load method. Let's look at an example. Here we have the shows, and we have a web panel, and we have to choose one of the shows that are stored, and for that show, a sector and a percentage of increase in order to increase the price for that sector in the show. In this dynamic combo, there is a filter. Once the show has been selected, here I have to establish that those are the sectors of that show. So I need the show ID, which is like the other variable of show ID. Once I have chosen these two data and put in the percentage, I press here and we'll look at the code. The code with a variable, which is business component show, loads the show ID. I have uploaded the whole structure, and once I have the structure, I'm going to obtain a line of this kind. One sector, and then the get by key, and I obtain a line. Then to one sector dot sector price, I change the price, I save a commit. So with these few lines, I have loaded the structure, obtained a line with get by key, and as usual, everything is updated, the whole structure. The remove by key is similar. It's used to eliminate a line. In this case, I receive by parameter the show and the sector. So I have to load the show ID, and when I have it in show, to this variable business component dot sector, I apply remove by key, and that's what I wanted, save everything, and here we see what happened. So in principle, these are the new methods included in the version that you can start benefiting from. Now we are going to go to dynamic transactions. A question about communications. How can you explain to a programmer that this is easier than for each or delete? Well, it's not a question of being easier. We don't say you should not continue using the procedures, and you need them because of the performance, because procedures allow you to do everything. But if you can benefit from the rules of the business which are defined in the transaction, then let's try to use them. It's not that this is easier, there are different options. In order to complete Roberto's question, in the specifier, in GeneXus specifier, is there any way of establishing that if there is not a for each, uh, we may see the specification errors, like the allos eternal function, for example? No, at the moment, the answer is no. It's optional because of compatibility. In the evolution 2, it didn't exist. Well, now you have the specification codes. So I thought that maybe since you have these codes, you can say that it may be a warning of an error. Well, maybe in the future, since it's going to be used one way or another, it will happen, but not yet.